I'm going to start this morning with a pair of kind of parallel stories to set the stage for our topic this morning. Both involve ladies, we'll say, on the older end of the spectrum, okay? So our first lady today is she's in her 90s, and she finally made the decision. Her health was failing. Her eyesight was going bad. She made the decision to move into a nursing facility because she just didn't feel safe at home anymore. And this lady, she has 3 sons who want to be generous. They want to bless her. And so they all decide they're going to buy her a nice gift to celebrate and kind of bring some joy to what is a difficult time for someone to make that decision. And so her oldest son, very successful, very wealthy, he's done very well for himself, purchases his mom a brand new car. And so after getting the car, she writes him a thank you note and goes, "Son, I appreciate the thought, but as you know, my health's not good, my eyesight's not going well, I can't drive your car, but what I am doing is once a day I drive out and sit and I just enjoy the new car smell. So thank you so much for thinking of me during this difficult time." The second son works for a high-end art museum. And so he buys her a piece of art that is a majestic, glorious piece of art worth tens of thousands of dollars. And again, she writes her son a note and goes, "I appreciate the thought, son, but as you know, my eyesight's not what it used to be and just kind of looks like a blurry colored block on the wall. But my nurses really enjoy it, so we have some good conversations. So it's the thought that counts. Thank you for thinking of me." Well, the third son, he knows his mom's health is failing, knows that she can't see very well, and so he thinks what would she need most is probably some company. She's going to be kind of lonely. That's a big deal to move into a nursing care. So he pays for a professionally trained parrot, one that can speak, a conversation that they can have together that will respond. So basically, mom has a companion 24/7. And so she wrote him a thank you note too, and it said, "Dear son, yours is my favorite gift of all. It's the best chicken I've had in a long time." Our second story features a lady who had opened up a small business in a busy section of town. She had a cart where she was selling soft pretzels to people as they came out of work. 50 cents for a pretzel. You come out, walk down the street, you get a pretzel, get a little cheese sauce or whatever you want to dip it in and eat it on your way. And so she was using this as kind of like her retirement plan. And there was one gentleman, a high-priced lawyer, who came out every day and didn't like pretzels, made it clear he had no interest in pretzels, but every day he took 2 quarters and placed it on her cart. At one point he'd even told her, "Listen, I just do this because I love that you're out here working, I want to bless you, but pretzels aren't my thing." So every day for years, he walks by, 50 cents out of the pocket on the cart, takes no pretzel. Until one day he walks out, he pulls out those 2 quarters, he goes to put them on the cart, says, "Excuse me, sir, price is $1 now." Those 2 stories serve, I think, to highlight 2 different responses that we can have. On the one hand, you have a lady who, even though the gifts are terrible gifts, finds reasons to be thankful and grateful in the midst of them. Even though they are not what she actually needs, even though they're probably not what she would pick out for herself, she appreciates the heart of her sons and finds reason for gratitude in the midst of them. And the other situation, we have this woman who's been blessed day after day after day after day and still has this sense of kind of entitlement, right? That what you've given me is not enough. What you've given me is not sufficient. Don't I deserve more? Price is $1 now. And we have these 2 ideas of how one might respond to the blessings that come into our lives. And the same is true spiritually speaking. There are those who see what God has done for them, who see the rock that He has been, who see the salvation that is provided, who see the comfort that has been given, and they cannot stop saying thank you for Him. Doesn't mean everything's perfect. Doesn't mean everything's exactly the way we would write the story. Doesn't mean we have everything our hearts ever desired. It just means we look at the world around us and go, "Man, God has been good to me, and I want to thank Him for what He's done." And there are those who are a bit entitled, who look at what God has done, but also look at all the things they wish He'd done, who look at all the blessings He's poured out and go, "But yeah, what about this, God? Why didn't you answer that prayer? Why didn't you give me this thing? Why are they better off than I am?" And they approach God with a sense of entitlement. As we finish up our Summer Jam series, looking at these summer anthems, these songs of the summer, these songs that you can come back to and sing over and over and over again, we spent the first 5 weeks of our series looking at God's role in the relationship. That when we are suffering and we cry out, "How long, O Lord?" He answers, and He's in the midst of that suffering with us. That He is a good God who loves us and wants what's best for us, and a great God who's able to bless us beyond our wildest dreams. That He is the one who redeems us from the pit of death, that a price we could not pay on our own, He freely paid through Jesus. And today we look at what our response to that is. Do you respond with thanksgiving and worship and praise? Or do you respond with a sense of entitlement? Really, God, that's all you got to offer? It's kind of a rough week, God. Where were you in that? And we have two choices. And David calls us clearly to one of them. We're going to be in Psalm 138 this morning. Psalm 138, if you want to turn there. And David has written many of the Psalms that we've studied throughout this series. And we've seen him talk about God as his refuge. We've seen him talk about God as a strong tower. We've seen him talk about God as his redeemer. And now we're going to see David's response to the goodness of God. And we're going to let it call us to respond in a similar manner. In Psalm 138, beginning in verse 1, he says, I will give you thanks with all my heart. I will sing your praise before the heavenly beings. I will bow down towards your holy temple and give thanks to your name for your constant love and faithfulness. For you have exalted your name, your promise above everything else. On the day I called, you answered me. You increased strength within me. David's response to all that God has done is simple. I will give thanks with all my heart. I think that addition of the word all my heart is important because I think so many people, they walk through life kind of half-hearted. Do you ever go to work with somebody who comes to work half-hearted? Like they're there in body and their hands are kind of sort of doing their job, but you just want to take like a whip and crack it and be like, let's go, get to work. What are you doing? They're going through life half-hearted. Maybe you've been in a relationship with someone, either married to someone or a friendship, or you've watched your kids go through this where one member of that relationship is only half-heartedly into the relationship, right? Like they kind of want to be your friend, but when you really need help, they don't show up. They're not really willing to work through the hard stuff. They're only half their hearts in the situation. And some folks do church half-heartedly. They show up to church, they sing our songs, they listen to me ramble, and they go, I got this Jesus thing down. But when it comes to actually following Jesus, actually living out those commands, actually going and doing the things we talk about here, that's an awful lot of work. I'm not really in for all that stuff. It's a half-hearted effort. And many, many folks live their entire lives half-hearted. But for David, when you recognize what God has done, when you really, truly appreciate all of the goodness that He's given to you, when you really see all of the little blessings we talked about, count your blessings, name them one by one. When you actually go through that process, the response to God is not half-hearted thanksgiving. It's not, hey, thanks God, and then about, I give you thanks with all of my heart. God, you get the whole thing. You get everything that I am. You are worthy of all the praise I have to offer. You are worthy of all the thanksgiving I have to speak. I will praise you and thank you. I give thanks with my whole heart. That next line there in verse 1 is a little bit interesting. I want to read it to you again. He says, I will sing your praise before the heavenly beings. This is one of those spots where some of you with a different translation might be better served. The literal word-for-word translation from the Hebrew here is, I will give you praise in the face of the gods. So that's an interesting kind of way to word picture to face, because there's only one God, right? What does he mean in the face of the gods? Well, this phrasing, plus verse 3, gives us a hint that this psalm was probably not written in Israel. That this is, if it's written by David, as tradition tells us, is probably written while he's living among the Philistines. Okay? And if it's written, it says Davidic at the top of your psalm, so maybe it's written by someone from the school of David, the thought of David. So some scholars think maybe it's even written during the exile while they're living in Babylon. But it tells us that they're looking towards the temple. They can't get to the temple. And they're apparently living among the gods. So what he means is, I am surrounded by lowercase g, not capital G God, not Yahweh, but I am surrounded or among the little g gods, the Baals and the Asherahs of the world. If David's writing this from Philistia, he's surrounded by people who worship Dagon, the god of the Philistines. And so as he's surrounded by these pagan gods, he chooses in the midst of that to give thanks and praise to Yahweh, the one true God, instead. And I think that's pertinent. It's what actually drew me to this psalm. There are lots of psalms of thanksgiving we could have picked for our summer jam, but this line in particular I thought was so pertinent for us today. Because whether you know it or not, you live in a culture where you are surrounded by little g gods. We talk about it all the time. You live in a culture where you are pressured to chase the God of success, to build a bigger business, to get another promotion, to win an award, to hang a plaque on your wall, to get a certificate. You should see, like, you go to graduation parties and we got books, right, of every certificate we've ever won and every award, and we get medals hanging on the wall from all. We are driven to be successful, to find our meaning, to find our purpose, to find our joy from accomplishing stuff. But that's a false God. That can't actually satisfy, can't actually help us in times of trouble. We get pressure to chase the God of materialism, right? To look at our neighbor and go, man, they got a nice boat over there. It'd be nice if I had a boat. Man, you see the new car they're driving? To get that bigger paycheck, to start the side hustle, to retire better, to have the vacation home, to whatever the case may be. There's this pressure around us to worship the God of materialism, to live bigger and better and accomplish more and spend more and have nicer things and take joy and pleasure from those things. And so to read Psalm 138 in the context of today is to say this: I refuse to believe that my joy comes from material possessions. I refuse to believe that my joy comes from accomplishing things. I refuse to believe that my joy comes from other people liking me. I refuse to believe that my joy comes from a political situation. And I choose in the midst of all these false gods to praise Yahweh, the one true God, to give Him thanks for my blessings, to see Him as the source of all good in my life, to recognize that, yes, I may work hard, I may make the most of what God has given me, but everything I have is a gift from Him. Even my ability to work hard is a gift from Him. And so I choose, while everyone else around me is giving credit to false gods and false idols, I choose to give my thanks and my praise to the one true God. That's what David's saying. I'm not going to worship Dagon. I'm not going to worship Baal. I'm not going to worship Asherah. In the face of those gods, I will praise Yahweh, for He alone has been good to me. He alone is my strong tower. He alone is my Redeemer. And He alone will I praise. The last thing I want to read before we keep going on here is I want to take a look at verse 2 for just a moment. He says, I will bow down toward your holy temple, give thanks to your name for your constant love and faithfulness or truth or holiness, depending on which version you're reading out of this morning. And I want to kind of look at those two words, because those two words give us this clear picture of the kind of God that we praise. On the one hand, He is a God of truth, a God of faithfulness, a God of righteousness. In a world where everybody else makes promises they can't keep, in a world where we change the definition of right and wrong every couple of months to fit what makes us happy, in a world where standards are moving up and down, in a world where you can't really depend on anyone else, here's a God who says, I am the God of truth, a God of faithfulness. When I make a promise, I keep it. When I set standards, they stay. When I speak, it is what is right. I am holy, I am pure, I am right, I am just, I am true. And He holds the standard up of, this is who I am. This is who God is. He is the God of truth and righteousness. But He is also the God of love. The Hebrew word there is the word hesed. We've talked about that at length over the last couple of years. It's the closest the Old Testament has to using the New Testament word agape. That no strings attached, never-ending, faithful love of God. In fact, a lot of your versions, when that word hesed shows up, they'll translate it loving kindness or steadfast loving kindness, because they want to emphasize the point that this is not generic love. This is not the cheap, run-of-the-mill, oh, she's so pretty, I love her kind of love. This is not the, man, I love this cheeseburger kind of love, okay? This is the, no matter what happens, even if you are unfaithful, I will be faithful. Even if you rebel, I will show you mercy. My promises will never end. I care about you, and nothing will ever change that kind of love. That's the word hesed. And so we have these two words coupled, a God who is perfect and pure and righteous and holy, and yet a God who is merciful and kind and loving despite our rebellious nature. And it's at that intersection of those two things, of holiness and mercy, of righteousness and grace, of justice, and of never-ending love that we find the God we praise. In fact, we find these two ideas placed side by side throughout Scripture. You remember John 1? We read about Jesus becoming flesh, and it says that we have seen His glory, and He was full of grace and truth, right? Or those of you who sat in my Sunday school class, we just finished the letter of 1 John. And 1 John is anchored by these two bold pillars about who God is, right? In 1 John 1, God is light, and in Him there is no darkness. There is no sin, there is no deceitfulness, there is no unfaithfulness. He is light, He is pure, He is holy. But then in 1 John 4, and God is love. And He has shown His love to us in this, that while we were sinners, He sent His Son. We only know what love is because He sent His Son. We don't even know what love looks like if not for God's love for us. God is light, and God is love. God is truth, and God is mercy. And it is these two ideals we place side by side that cause us to respond in thanksgiving, that cause us to see that God is worthy of praise and worship, that He is good and He is gracious and He is worthy of our praise. In fact, this is David's argument as we work through the psalm. David is convinced that if everybody just knew who God really was, they would respond like Him. That if they really knew how good God was, how righteous He was, how holy He was, and how loving and merciful and gracious He was, they would respond like Him. They would give thanks with their whole hearts, because what other logical response is there? And this is how he continues the psalm in verse 4. He says, all the kings on earth will give you thanks, Lord, when they hear what you have promised. If you hear that, they just knew. If they just knew what God was like, if they just knew how good He was to us, then everybody would give thanks to the Lord. For they will sing of the Lord's ways, for the Lord's glory is great. You see, for David, he's convinced that if you could just take those two truths, the goodness of God, the righteousness of God, that He's the one who sets the standard of right and wrong, and the love of God and the mercy of God, if you could just put those in your heart, then thanksgiving would come overflowing. Praise would come pouring out of who you were. So I have a simple little object lesson I want to illustrate for you. I have little containers with water. This is actually an age test. If you ever want to know if somebody's over or under 30, show them one of these and ask them what it is. Anybody know what this is? It's a film canister. No one younger than 35 has any clue what this is. They've never seen one before. In fact, I was having a video chat with a 24-year-old this week, and I explained that it was a film canister. She goes, what's a film canister? I said, well, cameras used to take film. And she went, what's film? Like, oh, good. I'm officially old. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. Then next to my little film canisters of water, I have some Alka-Seltzer. Okay? Again, this is an age test. The older you get, the more you're familiar with what Alka-Seltzer does, right? Daily part of life for some of you. What happens when you put Alka-Seltzer in water? Pop, pop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is. That's right. Well, funny thing happens when you put Alka-Seltzer in water and then you snap the lid on and make them airtight. Because pressure begins to build inside the container, and the container eventually, if it works properly, oh, I was hoping it was going to land right upright. That'd have been awesome. That pressure builds up, and the container eventually is no longer strong enough to hold it in. Eventually, that bubbling up inside has to come out. And that's the image that David has here. I love in Psalm 119, it talks about this idea. It says that when you instruct me in your ways, O Lord, my praise overflows in your presence. That once I know who you really are, God, once I get a clear picture of who you actually are and what you've actually done, that praise and thanksgiving and joy, it bubbles up inside of me until I can no longer contain it, but I must pour out my praise to you. I must give you thanks, for I cannot hold it in any longer. That's the image David has in mind here. That after the goodness God has shown him, after the love God has shown him, he cannot do anything but give thanks with his whole heart. And so let me do that for you this morning. We're going to sing an invitation song here in just a minute or two. But I just want to hold up the identity of God before you. in all of its glory and all of its power. And then I want to give you an opportunity to respond in praise, to respond as David does, to give thanks and praise with your whole heart. So I just want to hold this image of God up high, and then we're going to pray, and then together we're going to sing about our love for this great God and all that He's done for us. So here's who God is. God at the core of His being is, first of all, incredibly holy and righteous. There's not a glimmer of imperfection among Him. And that's so radical for us to wrap our brain around, because every person you've ever met is deeply flawed. Even the people you love, your spouse and your kids. If I asked you, could you write down a list of all their imperfections, you'd need a notebook, right? One piece of paper wouldn't do. They lose their temper too much, or kind of don't put their socks where they're supposed to, and they can't cook, or they forget stuff, or whatever your list might be. You'd have a list, because every person you've ever met in your entire life is an imperfect person, including yourself. And we're probably more painfully aware of our own imperfections than even those that we love. But God is not like that. God is perfect. When it says that God is faithful and God is true and God is light, it means that He is perfect. He's never sinned. He's never chosen evil. He's never broken a promise. He's never been late. He's never made a mistake. He is without flaw. He is perfect. And yet, He looks at us in all of our imperfections and all of our flaws, and He loves us despite that. You ever seen a relationship where you walk away and go, what in the world is she doing with him? Right? You're like, she is smart and beautiful and successful, and he is kind of an idiot. She could do so much better than... Stop pointing at your spouse. It's not nice. I see you. Long conversations over lunch today. God is perfect. And He chose me. God is holy. And He chose me. God is without blemish or fault. And He chose you. And His love knows no bounds and no limits. To the point that, as we talked about last week, when there was a price to be paid for your life, when the situation of death came to the forefront and we had no hope, no chance of paying the price, it cost more than we could ever afford, He raised His hand and said, I'll pay for you. And He sent His Son to endure death and to conquer death so that you didn't have to worry about it. This God, who has no need of us, He is perfect without us, chooses to love you and welcome you into His family. And how can you know that news to be true and not feel the joy and thanksgiving bubbling up in your soul, and not feel an urge to praise and thank a God who would do that for you and for me? Is not giving thanks with our whole heart the only appropriate response? Father, we come into this moment and we want to do exactly that. We want to recognize all that you have done for us, all that you have given to us, far more than we could ask for, far more than we deserve. And we ask in this moment that the song we sing here is an act of praise and thanksgiving, pleasing to your name, that you are glorified as we sing, our hearts bubbling up with praise because of your goodness and truth, and because of your mercy and love. Father, thank you. We give you praise with our whole hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.